Ladies and gentlemen, the wait is finally over. Since completing and 100%ing all of the achievements for both Metro 2033 and Last Light, a few of you guys have been asking, where the hell is the Metro Exodus video at? Well, it's finally here. In this video, we are going to be going through and getting the Platinum Trophy for Metro Exodus. Now, unlike Last Light where I covered the DLC and the main game all in the same video, I won't be doing the same with this, purely because the DLC in this game is a hell of a lot longer than in the previous. Not only are there two separate storylines to go through, but one of the DLCs also require an additional playthrough of the main game on New Game Plus, on what I can only assume is a ridiculously hard difficulty, given the name is Iron Lung and the fact that you get a trophy for it. So while we aren't covering them today, we will be in the future. Also, just before we get into this video, because we have got a little bit of a long one today, we are closing in on that 50,000 subscriber mark, and I just want to say thank you to each and every single one of you for the support. It truly means a hell of a lot to me and is what really keeps me going when making content for YouTube. Although we are not at 50,000 just yet, so if you haven't already and you find yourself enjoying any of my content, including this video, hitting that subscribe button would be greatly appreciated. And if you want to go that extra mile, like, share, and definitely leave a comment. I always look at the comments and try to respond to as many as I can. Anyway, with the shameful self-plug out of the way, let's get into the video. So before we actually start the game, I'll take the time to mention that not only is there two separate ending related trophies requiring 2 full playthroughs, but there is also a trophy for completing the game on what was at least the hardest difficulty, Ranger Hardcore. Now for my first playthrough, I'm going to be going for the good ending while playing on normal difficulty, but I'll explain the reason as to why a little bit later. The game takes place quite a while after the events of the previous game, and we begin the game as Artyom and we find him up on the surface in Moscow making his way back down into the metro. At first all was going well, until... Yep, we got jumped by some mutants, so now we had to fight our way out, but while escaping I made sure to pick up the first of Artyom's diary entries. There are a total of 70 of these bad boys to collect, so as I make my way through the game I will be collecting each and every single one. We then make a dart for the exit, and just as we thought it was safe, we get jumped by another pack of Nazalis. However, we are thankfully saved by our fellow comrades. Although the combination of Nazalis attacks and the amount of radiation we took up on the surface immediately led to us ending up in hospital. We soon awaken to find Anna at our side, and she pleads with us to stop going up to the surface. You see, Artyom wasn't doing any supply runs or running any kind of missions. He was heading up to the surface in an attempt to contact anyone who may be living on the surface, although judging by everyone's reaction he's not had much luck. Miller also shares his thoughts on our silly dream and tells us that it has to stop. At this point we then head to the bar to knock back a few with the boys, but before we could do that I pick up my first of 21 postcards, another collectible that we can find throughout the game, and of course it comes with its very own trophy for collecting all of them. After meeting with the crew, we then fast forward to a week later where we once again find ourselves on the surface attempting to contact humanity. However, this time we have Anna with us. Unfortunately, she was no lucky charm though, as we still don't get any kind of signal from outside of Moscow. So at this point we decide to just call it a day and head back down into the metro. As we make our way back, a blizzard decides to roll in, but as if it was a sign from God, we all of a sudden witness an actual working train making its way out of Moscow. Evidence of what we have been trying to prove for so long, and something which according to the government in the metro wasn't possible. Anna then suggests catching up to it, even though just how? Like, are we gonna run after it? Like, I know you used to call me Rabbit, but geez, I ain't that quick. Luckily, we could save a little bit of legwork as all of a sudden a few of our guys pull up and offer us a ride, so we of course jump in. However, proceed to get smacked in the face. When we wake up, it turns out these guys weren't part of the order, but they are instead Hunza officers, basically the official military of the metro. It also turns out that we weren't their first catch of the day, and they had 2 others in the back of the van as well. They both go on to tell us that they are actually from a village outside of Moscow and that they came here in search for the boy's father who left a year back, which gets Anna even more excited than Artyom, but also pissed that the government in the metro has been hiding this from us. All of a sudden, the officers pull over and decide they were going to execute the survivors. I assume to keep the fact that there is an outside world secret, but we say hell nah brother and try to save them, although end up taking a bullet ourselves and having their corpses thrown on top of us. Thankfully, it takes more than a bullet and a few dead bodies to take down Artyom, and we proceed to push forward where we eventually find the same train we had previously come across pulling into some kind of station. We decide to sneak in where we find a man called Yermak who tells us that Anna is here too, currently getting interrogated, and that he'll help us reach her. Now, this whole little section here is basically an introduction into the stealth mechanics and something that we will be using throughout the majority of this game, especially in this playthrough. But I'm not going to spend too long talking about it, as I'm sure all of you guys know how stealth works in Metro. We eventually find and free Anna from her interrogator and go on to do a bit of interrogating of our own. We find out that the reason we have never been able to contact anyone outside of Moscow is because of a series of network jammers put in place to essentially make Moscow look like a dead city in order to prevent any further attacks due to a war that's still potentially going on. Of course, we break that jammer and discover that multiple countries all around the world are still very much alive and communicating, although as to whether a war is still going on remains a mystery. At this point, Anna decides we've got to tell the whole Metro about this, and with the help of Yermak, we fight through the hands of soldiers and manage to escape by stealing their train. While pushing through the station though, taking out all of the soldiers, we did manage to unlock our very first trophy, Martian, for patching up the gas mask after it had been damaged. After escaping on the train, we were eventually reunited with Miller and the rest of the crew. Turns out that Miller actually knew about this for some time now, but decided not to share it with the rest of us, something that would have saved Artyom from death quite a few times now. However, there wasn't enough time to be angry, as all of a sudden another train pulls up beside us and orders us to stop the train or they'll open fire. At this point, we know that whether we stop or not, we're going to be sentenced to treason, and so we decide to say screw it and come up with the plan of boarding the train and blowing it up from the inside. Nothing really to mention here, all we did was sneak past everyone, but just because we couldn't kill didn't mean we couldn't have a little bit of fun, and so decided to detach each of the carriages from the train. Doing this though did nab us our second trophy. We eventually make it to the train's engine room, set an explosive on the furnace, and after escaping, we watch it go boom, completing the first level of the game and unlocking yet another trophy. At this point, we then asked Miller why he hadn't told any of us about this, but he explains that he only found out about half a year ago and that it was under a strict "you talk, you die" policy. We also discover that a vast majority of the area outside of Moscow is relatively free of radiation, or at least low enough to be non-fatal, although Miller was led to believe that enemy occupying forces were in the surrounding areas, so we proceeded with caution. We then attempt to use the radio to see if we could get any contact from the outside world, where we actually receive a message with coordinates to a place called the Ark, a military bunker said to have the most important members of the government and military forces inside, and we decide to make our way there to tell them that Moscow is very much alive and that we had been playing dead all these years, which Miller believes will change absolutely everything. Until then though, we've got a long stretch ahead of us, so we decide to name our big bucket of bolts, and Idiot comes up with the name Aurora, which we agree is a smashing name for a train. And thankfully the game does as well, as we actually unlock another trophy of the same name just for naming the train, and we didn't even name it. We then decide the crew could do with a little music, so using the radio we search the frequencies in hopes of finding some decent tunes, and believe it or not, but we actually get another trophy for doing so. I swear, this game is just chucking trophies at us. Eventually, our travels across Russia takes us to an area known as the Volga, where we are unfortunately left stranded after hitting a barricade and taking shots from some locals. At this point, Miller tasks me and Anna to scout out the local church in the distance to see if we can make contact, and so we make our way out and take our first steps into the snowy wilderness. Now, if you remember earlier in the beginning of the video, I said while I needed to complete a playthrough on Ranger Hardcore for a specific trophy, I would be playing through my first playthrough on Normal, and now I'll tell you why. You see, Metro Exodus is different from its predecessors. While it's still chapter based, rather than taking us on a linear path through multiple levels, we are instead thrown into big open world areas that we are free to explore. This means that a lot of collectibles are scattered a lot further apart from one another, which means taking a lot of out of the way trips to collect them all. Not only that, but there are also side quests that we will need to complete in order to ensure we get the good ending. For the most part, these are just rescuing prisoners or slaves and taking down enemy camps, but they are all all needed to contribute to us getting the good ending, which, like the collectibles, require us to go out of our way to complete. Also, unless the enemies are mutants, we can't really kill them, as much like the previous games, killing humans affects our karma, so I'm going to be knocking out most human enemies I come across, with a few exceptions in certain situations. All of these being unnecessary risks unless going for the good ending. So I'm doing all of this now on normal difficulty, so when it comes down to doing my Ranger hardcore playthrough, I can just bomb it through the main quest, killing anyone I feel like and avoiding all of these other risks that I would otherwise have to take. But with that out of the way, let's continue on with the story. We find out that the church we needed to reach is across some water, but thankfully there is a lovely little boat nearby that we can use to get across, and getting into the boat for the very first time nabs us the trophy regatta. Taking the boat across the pond, we eventually get to the church, however find out that its inhabitants are actually part of some weird cult and considers technology and electricity the work of the devil. Clearly, these weren't people that we were going to be able to effectively communicate with, so we decide to just turn around and head back the way we came. Although on the way out, we do manage to free a woman and her son, who was locked at the top of the tower, and tell them to make their way towards the train. Once we make it back to the train, we report our findings to Miller and he tasks us with a new objective. While we were out, the crew had managed to make contact with someone nearby who says they'll be able to help us get the train up and running again, and so now our job was to go and meet them. Thankfully, the trip over there wasn't too difficult, with the main enemy in our way being ghouls, which thankfully the man we were on our way to see helped us deal with. And after clearing a path to him, we then meet up with the man who we find out is named Crest, and he agrees to help us out in getting the train up and running. However, on our way back to the Aurora, we get a message from Miller asking us to locate Anna, who had gone exploring nearby and wasn't answering her radio. Turns out she had fell into some kind of storage room that was filled with gas and had filled her lungs so much that she passed out and began hallucinating. Now, because the air in here was so toxic, I decided to get one of the miscellaneous trophies out of the way, and that was the Last Breath trophy for running out of filters and crafting another one while suffocating. I decided to get it out of the way now, as honestly, there is quite a lot of loot in this game, and the chances of us actually running out of filters, honestly, is very slim. So it's better to get it out of the way early, and then that way we don't have to worry about it. Continuing on, we clear out the area of ghouls and manage to open up the front door, allowing Anna to get some fresh air, and a few of our crewmates arrive to take her back to the Aurora, which, funnily enough, is exactly where we were going, so I don't know why we couldn't just take her, but, you know, fair enough. Back at the train, we once again find ourselves getting given a new objective. Now, Katya and her daughter, the two that we rescued from the cult in the church, wants to come with us, and although Miller's against the idea, he eventually gives in and agrees. As she's got medical training, she could come in handy on the path ahead. There was one issue though. There is already a severe lack of space on the train, let alone bring in 2 extra people along. Thankfully though, Crest had a solution. Nearby there was a terminal that he had managed to stash a rail car inside of, which we could use to bring a carriage back to the Aurora. So with that, we craft some supplies and make a move. Making our way through the hangar though was no easy feat. There was an absolute ton of ghouls, and even though we were on normal, they were very much capable of easily wiping us out. So for the most part, I tried to stay as quiet as possible. Now thankfully, we didn't need to get close to take out these enemies, as we had a weapon capable of silently taking them out, the T-Har, and as we make our way through, we managed to get our 30th kill with the weapon, nabbing us the Silent Marksman trophy. Now, on top of an ungodly amount of ghouls, we also had to deal with a huge mutated catfish that wasn't pleased that we were in his territory. Little did this catfish know though that we are a mighty Russian warrior who has literally nuked an entire population of intelligent beings in the name of survival. Thankfully, this catfish was not an intelligent being, and we were able to lure the catfish in with some food before dumping a whole load of sharp metal on top of it. Thankfully, this was enough to take the beast down, and we unlocked the Fisherman trophy for doing so. And so with the ghouls and catfish now taken care of, we could open up the terminal and escape with the railcar, which also nabs us another trophy. While making our way over towards the carriage, I also made sure to stop off to get my hands on a few items needed for a side quest. One was a guitar which we needed to return to Stepan, and the other was a teddy bear which we could return to Katya's daughter. This teddy bear, however, had a new best friend, a massive demon, but it wasn't as bad as it sounds. You see, this demon was very tired after taking his new friend sightseeing, and so had returned to his nest for a little snooze, until I came along and ruined its day, which I managed to do by chucking a Molotov at it, but doing so did manage to nab us us the Firebird trophy for taking down a demon with fire. And then we also unlocked the trophy Friend of the Crew for collecting both items for our crewmates and completing that side quest. So with the side quest now completed, we can continue on with the main quest, and of course getting the carriage wasn't going to be easy. The carriage just so happened to be in the hands of a group of bandits, and they weren't the type to just willingly give it up, so we found ourselves using the cover of night to sneak into their base and slowly but surely knock each and every single one of them out until the coast was clear. It took me a couple of attempts, as I can't lie, it is incredibly easy to get spotted, but eventually we were successful, and while knocking out all of the enemies, we managed to nab the Saboteur trophy for knocking out or melee killing a total of 50 enemies. Oh, and we also get a trophy for getting our hands on the carriage. With carriage now in our possession, we proceed to return it to the Aurora and get our next mission. Turns out that we were now ready to leave the Volga, and our final objective was to make our way down to the local docks to meet up with a few of our squad mates and commandeer one of the boats to bring down the bridge up ahead for the train to cross. Of course there was a ton of enemies, but thankfully we were able to sneak onto and take one of the boats without being caught by the locals, and proceed to carry on being a sneaky ninja as we proceed across a heavily fortified bridge. Eventually me and Duke come face to face with the leader of this cult, and we tell him that we mean him and his people no harm, and that all we want is passage across the bridge. Now this is where completing those side quests and being as non-violent as possible comes into play, as this moment here dictates whether Duke lives or dies. Although the leader of this cult branded us as heretics, even he could see that we had been more than merciful to his people, and proceeds to tell his men to stand down and hold their fire, and gives us permission to cross the bridge, although we are never to return, which is good enough for us. Thankfully this meant Duke doesn't get shot and killed here, and we were able to leave with a full crew, nabbing the Duke trophy for having Duke survive, as well as the Lower the Bridge trophy for completing the Volga chapter. After leaving the Volga, the Colonel was able to get in contact with the Ark again to tell them of our upcoming arrival, and thankfully they were more than happy to accommodate us, so it seemed that everything was beginning to look up. That was until we actually got there. Turns out the government and military officials that was supposed to be here had actually been replaced by a massive army of cannibals, and they managed to make off with Anna. Thankfully though, a few of our boys who stayed behind realised something was wrong and came to our rescue. And so now our main objective was just to get Anna and get out of there as quickly as we can. Now I actually decided to use this very first section of the level as the opportunity to knock out two miscellaneous trophies. The first being the Kaleidoscope trophy for killing 3 enemies using a weapon with a scope while wearing a gas mask and night vision goggles. And the second being the Righteous Vengeance trophy for killing a total of 90 cannibals. We then continue through the cannibals base, killing absolutely everyone in our path until we manage to find Anna and then proceed to escape, completing the Yamantau chapter and unlocking the trophy Spoiled Dinner. After escaping becoming someone's next meal, we then find ourselves in a completely different environment, as rather than the typical snowy and destroyed scenery that we're used to seeing, we instead are greeted with a scorching hot desert. The issue was that not only was everyone suffering from the heat and lack of water, but we were also suffering from a lack of fuel, meaning that we couldn't push forward out of this area until we had some more. So while Anna and Demir scout for fuel and water, we were given the task of finding out who the men are that we saw who had a working car and to see if they could assist us. Before setting off though, we of course make sure that we are stocked up on ammo and other supplies, and we actually managed to nab a few trophies here. The Handyman trophy for spending a total of 500 resources on crafting items, and the Gunsmith trophy for fully modifying one of our weapons. We end up finding the car we were searching for pretty quickly, however its previous owners had been torn apart by ghouls, and the only survivor we ended up knocking out and leaving on the roof, probably to die by ghouls. But we did manage to take the key to their car, and much like every other vehicle so far, getting into it for the first time nabs us another trophy. Now that we had the car, I decided to do a quick manual save that I could revert to, and that's because I planned on knocking out another trophy that we probably otherwise wouldn't get in this area naturally, and that trophy was the Carmageddon trophy. No, I didn't mispronounce it, it is actually Carmageddon. Relatively simple to unlock, as all we needed to do was run over 50 enemies, but from personal experience, the vehicle can break pretty quickly, so using this save I was able to continuously run over the same few enemies without having to worry about losing the car, and within about 10 minutes, we nabbed the trophy. After knocking out that trophy, our next job was to head to the local comm centre located at a nearby lighthouse. However, when we get there, we find the person living inside of the lighthouse under attack and decide to jump in and assist the woman by taking out her attackers. After putting everyone to sleep, the woman then invites us into the lighthouse. This is Gil. I'm not sure how you say it, but just know she is one of the good guys. She goes on to explain that the people we've been seeing here are actually a massive group of slavers known as the Munai Bailea, headed by someone that goes by the name of the Baron, and had almost all of the Caspian under his control. Now, while we were out in the desert, Miller had already made contact with Gil, and as we helped her deal with the slavers at her door, she agrees to take us down into the comms center, and Miller then tasks us with finding some impact maps in its archives. Of course, the place is abandoned, which of course means it's filled with all kinds of ugly wugglies, including everyone's favourite mutated spiders. Ugh, I absolutely hate these things. They're not necessarily hard to deal with on their own as they're afraid of light, but when you've got 3 or more coming at you from all different directions and you can only face one, they can gangbang you pretty damn quickly, so I took this area slow and stuck to the walls to lower the amount of possible directions that they can come from. Eventually though, we managed to gain access to the centre's archives and get our hands on the maps that Miller was looking for, which unlocked us another story related trophy. And then with the help of Griel and Demir, we are able to escape the facility, leaving the god-awful amount of spiders there were behind us, and with the maps now in hand, we could report back to Miller. After taking the maps back to Miller, we are then given our next mission, and that was to assist Demir into breaking into quite a large slaver camp to steal a massive tanker of water, in order to prevent our crew dying of thirst in the heat. And while making our way over to meet with Demir, we actually ran over a few more enemies, which managed to nab us the antibiotic trophy for killing a total of 300 mutants. Something which honestly I never expected to have completed so soon, but I'm not complaining. A little while later, we eventually meet up with Demir and find ourselves passing through an abandoned but mutant-ridden underground settlement until we reach the slaver camp. Once inside, our job was to get to the top of the camp to reach the oasis, and while we could take the stairs, the bucket lift that they have is much quicker, and we actually unlock a trophy for taking it to the top. Once at the top, we then proceeded to knock out and sneak past all of the patrols until we were able to reach the lever to open up the gate, allowing us to escape with Demir and a truck full of water, after which we decided to take a well-earned nap. Back at the train though, we awakened to an incoming attack from the Baron's men, and so take a stand with the rest of our crew until we managed to take care of all of the incoming enemies. And I'm just curious actually as to why they never decided to wake us up when they arrived. You'd think that they would. Like, were they happy to just let us sleep through the whole thing? Like, oh, don't, Artyom's been a good boy, just let him sleep, we'll hold the fort. Like, I don't know, bit sus. To me, it seems like they all have a death wish. Once they had been dealt with though, Miller decides now is the time that we should probably leave the Caspian, but we still needed to get our hands on some fuel. Thankfully, Gil tells us that the Baron actually has some at his fortress, and so we now had one final mission before we could leave the desert behind us. But before we could move on to our final objective in the area, we had one more trophy to unlock, and that was the Dressed for Success trophy for finding our final upgrade for Artyom's suit. At this point, we had done absolutely everything we needed to in the Caspian, and so made our way over to meet Demir and Gil and start our infiltration into the Baron's fortress. For the most part, this was pretty easy, and we were able to sneak our way through the underground tunnels with relatively no issues, where we then find Demir and the tanker full of fuel that we've been looking for. At this point, the Baron confronts us and tells us to lower our weapons and to head up to the top of his fortress to have a word with him, and so we reluctantly agree. However, our friendly chat didn't last too long, and while Gil dealt with the Baron, we needed to defend ourselves. Even though there wasn't a lot of cover, it wasn't too difficult, and in no time at all we had cleared the area and regrouped up with Demir. We then break into the Baron's room, where Demir is able to save Gil from quite a lengthy drop while we take a golf club to the face. Thankfully though, our resident sniper Anna had her eyes on us and was able to take the Baron out before he offed us. At this point we can now make an escape and leave the Caspian. Gil then tells us that she has to stay and help give her people the freedom that they deserve, and because of our good deeds, Demir stays with us instead of staying with her. And so with that, we head back to the Aurora, completing the level and unlocking another 2 story related trophies. With the Caspian now behind us, our main focus was to find somewhere that we would be able to settle down. However, before we find our new home, we had a wedding to go to. Yes, it seems that Katya had won Stepan's heart and vice versa, and so they wanted to get married, which I was all for, especially as it gave us another trophy.
I hereby pronounce you husband and wife. Live long and be happy. Oh, and Gorka! Gorka! Gorka!
However, not everything was sunshine and rainbows just yet, as all of a sudden Anna starts coughing up blood. She reveals to us that back in Yamantau, one of the cannibal doctors actually told her that due to the amount of gas she inhaled back in the Volga, her lungs weren't in the best of shape. So now our mission changed from finding a new home to finding something to save Anna's life. Katya tells us that her mother actually had a bunch of information on a drug that could help Anna, but it would take some time to go through it all to get the location. Until then, me and Alyosha would have to scout out the forest up ahead to see if there was any signs of life and anything to help our beloved. Our trip into the Taiga Forest though wasn't the smoothest of journeys, as our rail car ends up getting knocked off the tracks and we are thrown into the water down below. Thankfully though, a local manages to save us from drowning, however tells us that her group had already captured Alyosha and that if we aren't careful, we will be next. So now we were left to find Alyosha and escape, all while having no access to any of our equipment. Lucky for us though, someone was kind enough to leave a crossbow nearby, which we then used to kill a wolf about to chow down on a prisoner. At this point though, we had officially killed at least one enemy with each ranged weapon, which nabs us the trophy Professional. And it wasn't too long before we was popping yet another miscellaneous trophy, decommunization, for destroying this statue. Now before continuing on, I'll take the time to mention that throughout this whole level we have the god-awful challenge of not getting noticed and without hurting anyone, partly for the good ending but also because we'll get the Forest Child trophy for doing so. This means that not only can we not kill, but we can't even knock the enemies out, meaning we are going to have to be extremely careful while navigating through the following areas. Now because there is actually a trophy for killing 30 enemies with the crossbow and obviously we can't kill anyone, I decided to make a quick save that I could revert back to, and then I continuously entered one of the tribal camps and cleared out all of the enemies until the trophy popped. Thankfully, it only took a few runs, which was about 10 minutes total, and we managed to get it. So I'm going to be honest now, there's not really a hell of a lot to talk about moving forward through the mission, as the majority of it is just me sneaking through multiple camps without getting spotted, and I can think of much more interesting things to show you, like the bear that decided he wanted to eat us. Can't lie, given the low amount of materials and equipment we had, this was a bit of a pain in the arse and he managed to kill me a couple of times, but eventually we showed the bear who the real master of the forest is and gave him a spanking so hard his future kids would feel it. Continuing on, again there's really not much to talk about. We're again sneaking and avoiding enemies, but we did end up finding a gentleman by the name of the Admiral that was throwing a tea party with a few of his very unalive buddies, and he invited us to join him. Bit weird, I can't lie, and kind of wanted to get out of there as quickly as possible, and thankfully his heavily drugged up tea and our brilliant guitar skills sent him off to sleep, allowing us to slip away and unlocking the trophy 5 o'clock.
Good tea, good tea.
Towards the end of the level, we do end up meeting back up with Alyosha, where we then have to take on the bear again. Of course, Alyosha was nowhere to be seen, leaving me to deal with it by myself, and the bear almost gets the better of us, but thankfully Alyosha does finally turn up and manages to save us. At this point, Alyosha warns the friendly tribals of the dangers that lie beyond the dam and tells them to get their people out of the forest before it collapses. We then do the exact same thing and get out of there by taking a zipline back over to the train, leaving the forest and unlocking another 3 trophies. Alyosha for getting the good ending and from preventing him from getting wounded, Forest Child for completing the level without getting noticed or attacking anyone, and the Sword of Damocles trophy for completing the level. Now even though we made it out of the forest in one piece, the same couldn't be said for Anna. Her condition was getting a lot worse and we were all afraid she didn't have much longer left with us. Luckily, Katya had managed to find out more information about this drug she knew of and that it could be found in the dead city of Novosibirsk? Novosibirsk? Novi. I think we'll call it Novi, it's much easier to say. The city, however, was heavily irradiated and spending even just a short amount of time on the surface is definitely going to be a death sentence. That's why Miller decides that me and him will be the ones to head into the city in search of this drug, while the rest of the crew defend the train and look after Anna. Once in the city, we end up finding our way down into its metro tunnels, where we discover that there was once quite a large community of people here. However, something must have come through recently and wiped everyone out. Most likely the decent amount of mutants that could be found scattered all over the place. We did however find one sole survivor, and this was a young boy named Kirill. He tells us that the reason why he was the only one of the survivors left is that due to the food shortages and a shortage of anti-rad, a civil war broke out, wiping out most of its population. He does however tell us that the drug we are looking for is also the same drug his people used to use, and that more of it can be found in the institute nearby. Before heading out on our final mission to save Anna though, I made sure to pick up our 21st and final postcard of the game, and doing so manages to nab us the Old World Pictures trophy. Continuing on, we find ourselves passing through a flooded area of the metro, absolutely filled with millipede-like creatures and massive leeches that like to spit acid at us. Honestly, this area is probably my most hated area in Metro Exodus. No idea why, but something about it I'm just not too keen on, especially this tunnel right here. It's absolutely filled with spitters and we are left constantly having to stop the boat to clear them out so we don't get absolutely shat on while rowing through it. Getting through the tunnel though does unlock us a well-deserved trophy. And from one trophy to another a short while after getting out of the tunnel, we also come across our final crafting bench of the game, and once again I decided to make a quick save that I could revert back to. I then repeatedly used this save to clean my weapons until I'd spent a total of 500 chemical resources unlocking the Tidy Man trophy. And honestly, I am thankful that I took the time to do it now, as I sat here for around 20 minutes repeatedly cleaning, reloading, cleaning, reloading. Can't lie, with the amount of time this took, I already knew that I definitely wouldn't have unlocked it on my next playthrough, and probably wouldn't have even unlocked it on a third. Continuing on, we eventually make it to the Institute and end up stumbling across a mutated gorilla called a Blind One, although they look a lot like the monsters known as librarians in the previous games. Going head to head with one of these brutes is definitely a no-go, as in case you couldn't tell just by looking at it, they are pretty beefy boys, so my plan was to now be as quiet as I could while making my way through the Institute, as even stepping on a few shards of glass can mean an early grave in seconds. As we progress through the Institute, it's clear that Artyom had probably taken just a little too much radiation, as we begin to continuously see hallucinations of Anna. Something that wasn't a hallucination though was the 70th and final diary entry that we ended up picking up, which not only meant do we unlock the librarian achievement, but we have now collected every collectible in the game, which takes a massive weight off my shoulders going into my second playthrough. Eventually we managed to get our hands on the drug that we can use to save Anna and immediately make a dart for the exit. A Blind One did try to get the jump on us, but ultimately ended up getting himself impaled on some rebar sticking out of the ground before taking a shard of ice to the face. But because we avoided killing any of the Blind Ones while we were in the Institute, excluding that one because technically that's not our fault, we get rewarded with another trophy. Now, due to the amount of radiation currently coursing through our body, we unfortunately pass out, but like the absolute lad he is, Miller shows up and gets us into the car and we head back towards the train. A little while later, we do end up coming back around again, however, Miller was looking a little worse for wear, and as a last resort, he tried to teach Kirill how to drive the car. Of course, he didn't really have much luck, and even though we were pretty much on the brink of death, we had no choice but to take over and drive through the blizzard in the hopes of making it back to the crew. While we do successfully make it back to the Aurora with the medicine, Miller however had succumbed to the radiation and unfortunately passed away, and we had taken so much radiation at this point that we were sure to follow suit any moment. Thankfully, the rest of the team quickly get us inside, and Katia tells them that they must all give as much blood as they can to even give us a chance of living, so while each member of the order donated their blood, we drifted in and out of consciousness. While unconscious though, we do have a chat with Miller. He tells us that essentially he's sorry for doubting us and sorry for not wanting to help sooner, and that the true reason why he didn't was that he was just afraid and too attached to his position in the military. Now though, he realises that the world we have come to discover was worth giving everything up for. He tells us that while he has a daughter, he always wanted a son, and that in a way, we was that son he never had. He tells us that now is not our time to die though, and that we must live on with Anna, and in his final moments, he leaves us with a few final requests. One, to bury his body overlooking Lake Baikal, and the second being to step up and lead the order as he once did. And with that, we say our final farewells to the Colonel and return to the land of the living.
Because I somehow did. Goodbye, Commander. Time to wake up. Come on. Rise and shine, son.
We grant the Colonel's final request, and while doing so, found a place that we could call home. We are then officially promoted to Commander of the Order, nabbing us the Your Destination trophy, and because we managed to keep all of our crew members alive through the story, we also get rewarded with the Full Strength trophy. So now with the good but ultimately sad ending finally complete, we could turn our focus onto our second playthrough of the game, and that is on Ranger Hardcore difficulty, as well as cleaning up any remaining trophies along the way. Now I'm going to be completely honest, I'm not going to sit here for ages talking about how much of a struggle Ranger Hardcore was, because if I'm being completely honest, it really wasn't that difficult. Of course, we died plenty of more times than we ever did going through the game on normal, but as we all know by now, a harder difficulty in any kind of combat related game usually results in more deaths anyway, and I could have actually avoided a lot of these deaths if I didn't decide to just shoot my way through every encounter. Now for the Ranger hardcore playthrough, as I said near the beginning of the video, my plan was going to be to bomb it through the main story, killing everyone I come across and avoiding everything that contributes towards the good ending, as of course in this playthrough we are going for that bad ending. In terms of remaining trophies not tied to the story, we only actually had 2 to unlock, so we're just going to quickly go through these. The first trophy was the sniper trophy for killing a total of 50 enemies at long distance, which I managed to get while in the Volga. And the second was the Headhunter trophy for killing a total of 300 human enemies, which I managed to get by just repeatedly killing a bunch of slaves in the Caspian. Now of course throughout the game, due to our choices, we do unfortunately lose Duke and Demir, while Alyosha gets wounded on our escape from the forest, which means that come the time we return to the Aurora with the medicine for Anna, there isn't enough members of the crew alive to donate enough blood to keep us going, which ultimately leads to us passing away from radiation poisoning. At this point we are then sentenced to an afterlife aboard the train of death, where we meet a few familiar faces from the previous games that had unfortunately lost their life. Oddly enough, we also find Khan aboard this train, but he isn't dead, he's just weird and has the ability to travel between the land of the living and the land of the dead whenever he sees fit. But with a new crew backing us and with Miller at the helm, we set off on that eternal voyage, unlocking a trophy of the same name, as well as unlocking the hardcore trophy for completing the game on Ranger hardcore, and of course with every other trophy now obtained, we are rewarded with the platinum. Now with that being the platinum trophy, this means we have officially completed Metro Exodus, at least until we return to complete the DLC. So with that, what are my thoughts on the experience as a whole? For me, I thoroughly enjoyed the previous 2 games. I loved and felt heavily invested in their stories. I loved the overall gameplay, and I loved the setting of the dark, dingy metro tunnels, and I'm glad to say that all of this also applies to Metro Exodus. And for a lot of it, the developers actually build upon what they've done so well in the previous 2 games. While the story is just as interesting, instead of spending the majority of it navigating our way through metro tunnels and stations, we are instead given the opportunity to explore some absolutely gorgeous open world areas, taking us hundreds of miles away from Moscow. Now when I first played the game, I wasn't too sure if I was going to be a fan of the open world sections after spending so long in the metro, but they've done an absolutely fantastic job with each of these areas, and it truly encourages you to explore and take on the dangers of the world above your own way. The combat, which for the most part is the same as the previous games, has been built upon with new mechanics, which definitely adds to the overall experience. You probably noticed that they lean slightly more into the survival genre with this game, as we have the ability to craft ammunition and other supplies like medkits, filters, things like that we will need for the journey ahead, as well as needing to make sure our weapons are clean and masks aren't broken, which is a nice touch and something that, to be honest, I wish the previous games now had. Of course, would I recommend this as not just a game but a series to platinum? Yes, 1000 times over. It is honestly a fantastic series, and it is definitely up there with my favourites. But with that, this does bring us to the end of the video. If you guys enjoyed the video, then a like and a share would be very much appreciated, and of course please make sure to leave your thoughts on Metro Exodus and the rest of the series down in the comments below. Again, we are closing in on that 50,000 subscriber mark, which I honestly can't thank you guys enough for, and hopefully you guys enjoy my content enough to hit that subscribe button and turn notifications on if you haven't already. Not just to stay up to date with everything that I upload, but to also hopefully be able to reach this huge milestone before Christmas. Honestly, it would be the best Christmas present ever, and it would honestly make my entire year. So if you can help me, thank you. I will love each and every single one of you. Anyway guys, I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you all in the next video.